Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Dementia Researcher Salon Webinar, where we explore careers and research topics across the dementia research field. I'm Adam Smith, and I'm delighted to be back after a week away, hosting today's session, which is on the day-to-day of working in drug trial delivery. I hope you enjoyed last week's session, which was with Ella Moonen-Howard, talking about innovation. If you missed that, do go back to past recordings and you can find a recording of last week's session. But thank you very much to Ella for hosting last week's session. But today we're all about clinical trials and working in trial delivery. And so I've got my pre-prepared introduction, which I'll go through now. Clinical trials are where science meets the patient. They're essential for turning promising theories into proven treatments, but they're also dynamic, diverse, and often overlooked career pathway in that space, full of behind-the-scenes roles that are just as critical as the research itself. And today we're going beyond the protocols and the patient forms to learn about what it's really like to work in clinical trials delivery, the people, the processes, the everyday, and the possibilities. And I hope by the end of this, you'll be inspired to consider working in that space yourself if you don't already. We're joined by two fantastic speakers, as ever, and they both know the realities of working in this field firsthand. First of all, we have the brilliant Laura Rooney. Let me just change the view on my screen. We have the incredible Laura Rooney, who's a lead research nurse at the Alzheimer Society, the first ever lead research nurse at Alzheimer Society. With a background in cancer trial delivery in Scotland, she now leads the Society's pioneering £3 million Dementia Research Nurse programme, which is just getting started across the UK. And alongside Laura, we have the brilliant Dr. Sarah Gregory, who podcast listeners will recognise from some of our previous shows. Sarah is a research fellow at the University of Edinburgh, studying dementia risk factors. But before her PhD, Sarah was on the front lines of trial coordination. I don't know if you still do now. I don't know if I'm miscrediting you, Sarah, with this being a past life. Managing everything from ethics to contracts to rater training, staff development, you name it. Sarah's had fingers in those pies for many years. Thank you very much to both Laura and Sarah for joining us today. As regular attendees will know, the Salon sessions involve each of our two guests giving a 10-minute presentation or talk, and then we're going to have questions and answers, which can come from you, and I have some questions of my own. So do type your questions at any time using the Q&A function, which is a little question mark if you're watching on the website, and if you're on the app, I think you have to tap at the top and go off to the right hand side where you can ask questions. But they'll each present for 10 minutes, then we'll have some questions, and if we have time and there's enough interest, we'll all move over and have some group chat as well. But that's enough from me. I believe Sarah is going to present first. Sarah, would you like to share your screen? Shall we test? We rehearsed this. It worked perfectly in practice. There we go. And it's worked again. So
you can hear me.
We can hear you. Perfect.
Brilliant. So thanks, Adam, for having me today. I am really excited to talk about this. Like Adam said, I started off my career in clinical trials. I worked in adult mental health clinical trials, as well as people living with dementia across a range of different causes, Lewy body, vascular, and Alzheimer's disease. Moved to the University of Edinburgh to do my PhD and work on cohort studies. And now I have a dual role where I'm a research fellow at the University of Edinburgh, do much more kind of epidemiological research. And then I have a role in Scottish Brain Sciences, which is an independent research organisation in Edinburgh. And I head up a cohort study there. But I'm also in the senior leadership team, which means that I have responsibility for input into a lot of the processes that build around our clinical trials. So what I was going to go through today is some of the things that are really important to setting up a really good environment in which to deliver drug trials. And then Laura will come in and really nicely go through some of the day-to-day as well, a bit more practically. So hopefully will be a good double act for you. So in terms of the 3 areas I was going to focus on, I was going to talk a little bit about research ethics, and then about the study setup processes, and then finally about quality assurance. So all things that maybe aren't the most exciting topics, but are really important to make sure we're delivering trials to the best of our abilities. And so for research ethics, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking of it sort of like our instruction manual on how to do our studies. And going through the research ethics process, I sit on a couple of ethics committees. I'm really passionate about research ethics. I know it's not everyone's favourite topic, and it can feel like a bit of a tick box exercise. But actually, you're getting so many different eyes on your project. So reframing it to use it more of a kind of crowdsourcing of what might not work when you roll this out into the real world. Not everyone who's involved in the protocol design process necessarily has the experience of living with the diagnoses that we're working with and hoping to improve lives of people living with those conditions. But actually, someone on your ethics committee might have a really good experience that they can say, this part of the study doesn't feel like it's going to work in the most ethical way. Have you thought about this? So really, whenever I get the chance, I always like to challenge people to kind of reconceptualize research ethics as a really helpful part of the process. So in terms of thinking about how this affects our day-to-day of working on clinical trials, some people either here today or watching this might actually be involved in doing final submission packages. So you might be the trial coordinator or the lead clinician, or you might be involved as a statistician or a radiology expert who's involved in putting that final submission package to the ethics committee. And so it's really thinking about that as the foundation stone of your instruction manual on how sites are going to do your clinical trial. So we all work to really tight deadlines, and the faster we can get through things, the quicker we can get our trials up and running, and the quicker we can get these interventions to participants and to patients. But actually making sure we've got a really strong foundation, that our paperwork is really clear, that we don't have the IRAS form if you're in the UK saying one thing, and the protocol saying something different, and the information sheet being a bit different again. That all really helps to set your sites up for success. On the flip side, if you're the site who's receiving this, making sure that you're going through this and you really understand this really well. This is kind of your instruction manual for everything you're going to do in the trial. And there'll be other things layered on top of that. You'll have a laboratory manual, you'll have an investigator's brochure, you might have a pharmacy manual or a rating manual. But really, the submission package is kind of your foundation. If you're really strong on that, you know how the other pieces are going to fit in. And one of the things that I think is also really helpful is to just remember that the research ethics application helps us translate what legal frameworks we're working in to how we're going to run our trials day to day. Many of our clinical trials are going to be global, and so the people who are putting those submission packages in are making sure that in each region they're operating, they are aligning to the relevant legislation in that country. So a nice example that I thought from Scotland, and this was something that I only really learnt about when I moved from working in England to working in Scotland, is if we're working on a non-clinical trial in Scotland, we're actually working under a different piece of legislation to England and Wales. So in Scotland, we'd work under the Adults with Incapacity Act 2000. But if we're working on a CTIMP, or a clinical trial of an investigational medicinal product, we're using UK-wide legislation, so the Medicines for Human Use Act. But even within that, we do have differences about who can provide consent on behalf of an adult who lacks capacity. So in Scotland, if we're talking about a non-CTIMP, we would need to be finding the person's welfare guardian or welfare attorney. These are legal positions that people will hold, or it could be the nearest relative. If we're looking at a CTIMP, we could additionally have a professional legal representative here. But this is different to what sites in England and Wales will be doing. Here you can have a personal legal representative, and it's not set out in the law exactly who that has to be in terms of guardian, attorney, nearest relative, or you can have the professional. So making sure we're really hot on the ethics in terms of knowing how that translates to how are we going to be able to involve people within our clinical trials in a way that supports them, but also is legally acceptable. And then another one that comes up a lot at our, or semi-regularly our ethics committee is thinking about something like the Welsh Language app. So making sure that if studies are running within Wales, that we are actually providing that information in Welsh and English to people as well. And if you've not worked within that region, it might just be something that doesn't occur to you, but actually using the ethics process can really help you to make sure that we're applying the right legal frameworks to our day-to-day of clinical trials. So the next topic that I thought was kind of the study setup, and I really like this picture to illustrate it, because I think being a study coordinator, a project manager, or even if you have responsibility for a part of the trial rather than overall, you're effectively just spinning multiple different plates and trying to wear lots of different hats and keep everything coming together so that you can get towards that first participant, first visit. So I think this setup period really is that key to your success. You hopefully have at least a bit of time between that submission going into ethics and working towards your site initiation visit, where you can really focus in on how are we going to run this trial really well in this real world setting of a clinical trials unit. So we know that time to set up is really important across so many different organisations. It's a metric that lots of us will work to, but we really need to make sure that doesn't happen at the harm of the quality of the work we're doing. So making sure we use that setup period to do really robust feasibilities. So what's your critical path for your first participant, first visit? Bringing in this terminology of a project manager and really professionalizing how we do setup, I think can really help us to set ourselves up for a really good place for our clinical trials. Knowing where you're going to recruit your participants from and who's responsible for each key stage on the critical path. Some of them are going to be our principal investigators, some will be our study coordinators, some will be our pharmacists. There'll be lots of different areas in which different people have different responsibilities. One of the things that I know I spent so much of my time doing as a coordinator was filing. And we have so many better solutions than when I first started about 15 years ago, when everything was paper. We've got brilliant electronic systems now where sponsors allow it, but they still need to be really easy to use because none of us love filing, but it is a reality of day-to-day clinical trial work. So when you can, using the setup period to set up your filing system to be really, really easy, because the more you can file something as it comes in from your monitor, as it happens with your participant, the better you can recreate that story of what's actually happened in the trial. Building an inspection readiness mindset in as well can be really helpful. It takes you so much longer to go back and correct things that didn't happen as they should than setting up those standards from the start. And making sure you've got training needs identified. So we all know our protocol training. We all hopefully know that we need to do good clinical practice, but there might be other things that our team come and say, I'd really love to do a cannulation course just to refresh my knowledge on that before we get to delivering an IV infusion to our participants. So making sure we're using that study setup to set our teams up for success as well. And the final bit that I was going to go over in my last couple of minutes is quality assurance. So again, not a super exciting topic for people, but I think it's really at the heart of day-to-day working in drug trial delivery. So making sure we're all thinking about this as an ongoing process. So it's not just when our monitor comes up and we think, oh gosh, I really should have checked through those files and had a look at our missing data. Or, well, the monitor's given me my list of what I need to do. Or that inspection letter comes through and now suddenly we've got an MHRA auditor on our doorstep that we have to prepare for. If we have it as an ongoing process, it becomes much easier to deal with again. And making sure that everyone who's in the clinical trials team knows that this is part of their job. So building that really, the kind of underlying culture of quality can be so essential to your team's success. And trying to use it in a really positive way as well. So making sure it's a tool to facilitate team conversations, training, identifying problems whilst they're small and manageable is so much better than having something that no one talks about, thinks about, and then we find big problems down the line. So the quality of culture, I think, is just kind of essential to the day-to-day of clinical trials. There's no point us being the best recruiters, no point us being the best country in which to get high numbers of participants in if our data quality is rubbish. Doesn't help to move science forward, doesn't benefit our participants or future patients, and can kind of link back into the ethical concerns early. So making quality part of our day-to-day super important. And that's everything that I was going to share, so I will stop now.
Oh, sorry. Wasn't sure if Adam was going to speak. So thanks very much, Sarah. That was a brilliant overview of all of the setup and considerations that we have to think. And in my slide, I suppose a lot of the work that I have experienced in my clinical research career to date. So I've been a research nurse for 17 years. I've spent the vast majority of that time in cancer clinical trials, early phase first in human and cell and gene therapies. But I think that we can all resonate that a lot of the work to do with clinical trials and clinical research delivery is hidden work. And what people see with regards to the study opening or the first participant being recruited is actually just the tip of the iceberg. And we need all of the parts that are detailed here under the water to happen either before the study opens, and you have covered all of that very well, and also when the study opens itself. And these are ongoing pieces of work with multidisciplinary teams that require everybody's input. And there's lots of career opportunities for people to dip in and out of all of these parts. But really, when the study is open, we've had our sponsor green light if it's a clinical trial from a commercial company, and we've got all our approvals in place. Quite often, the first questions we're asked, particularly by our monitors and the study sponsors, are, where are your participants? Can you just recruit some patients and it'll all be fine? And this is where really considered and measured recruitment plans come into play. You should be thinking about your recruitment plan all the way through study setup, understanding your referral pathways and where suitable participants might present, what their journey will be throughout standard of care, and where the best time to pick up people along the way should be. This should then be fed into your multidisciplinary team meetings, or thinking about any local networks that you could tie into, any community groups or any sort of engagement work, to really make sure that we are offering research opportunities to everybody who could potentially benefit from them, because we all want to make research as inclusive as possible. And when I saw this picture, it made me laugh. I think planning ahead is absolutely critical, and with a bit of planning, we can all be ridiculously good at conducting clinical research. So I've tried to lay out some key considerations when you're planning your visit. You will all be very familiar with your protocol, but not just your protocol, your imaging manuals, your randomization IVRS manuals, and any pharmacy or whatever your study needs. There will be a suite of documents that you will have become familiar with throughout the study setup process, and you will have considered these in relation to your local requirements and also the local teams that you need. So you've got your study open, and now you have a patient identified because you've thought carefully about your recruitment plan. So for your study visit, the number one key thing, and this goes back to Sarah's point of building in that excellence right from the start, is checking that everyone needed for your visit is on the delegation log. Have they been signed off by the PI? And remember, the PI themselves has to go on the delegation log. And have they done all of their study-specific training? Now, that is mandated by the sponsor, but there may also be additional clinical training that they need in order to get the competencies required on a local level. So again, thinking back to Sarah's point about cannulation or IV drugs, or is there lab competencies that you conduct locally to ensure that the people that are sample handling and processing within your institution are competent to do so. You're also wanting to lay out and check and double check everything you need. Make sure it's all the correct versions, all of your kits are in date, your giving sets are in date, making sure that any specific requirements, now it might be that the drug that you're giving has to have specific filters, and you have to make sure that your micron filters are the right size. You want to make sure that your tubing is compatible with the drug that you're giving. There are lots of considerations, and I would really encourage all of you to work with the multidisciplinary team and your pharmacy colleagues, etc., to make sure that before you have anyone come through the door, that this has all been thought about, the correct items have been ordered, and they're all available to you. Also think about the order of the assessments. Now, when we look at a schedule of events in a clinical trial protocol, many of the visits will be very busy, and it's not always clear from the schedule of events if there's a mandated sequence that procedures have to take place in order to be as per protocol. So take some real time to delve into that protocol and understand where this has to sit and what has to happen. And that will help you then get your colleagues, so whether that is your PI or anyone else that you need, or maybe it's just, you know, some help from people in the lab to process your samples, but it will help coordinate the day and get everybody that you need together at the right time to ensure that your visit goes smoothly. Personally, I always like to overestimate the time for a first visit, particularly for a first participant. It's always the time where you find out that things take 10 times longer than you've thought, and you do not want the stress of someone saying, we need in that room, we need that space. So give yourself plenty of time, because when you're stressed, you are more likely to make mistakes or miss something. In clinical trials, we don't want to do that. And I've come across this issue myself in the past. Make sure that you've had enough time for ordering your dry ice. Sometimes they won't deliver on a Monday or a Friday, especially if it's coming from labs abroad. So make sure, again, when you're planning your visit, that if you have got to process your samples and ship them abroad, have you got your dry ice lined up? Have you got your courier? And have you got all your airway bills and any international paperwork that you might require to get that shipped off safely? Because if a participant has been good enough to give us their samples and their time, then we want to make sure that we are handling those samples as carefully as possible to ensure that we're getting maximum quality in the terms of when the sample is received in the lab, it's still of a quality that can be analysed and contribute towards the science. And also thinking about, as we are advancing in dementia research, but also in other indications, the trials are becoming more and more complex, they're becoming more and more multidisciplinary, and you should think ahead of, do you need to let other teams know? It might be that you have to have a process with pharmacy where local bloods have been checked and they're within certain parameters, and then the prescription can go to pharmacy for safety and be processed. It might be that you've got a high risk study and you have to let intensive care know that you're dosing and what time at. Or it might be that you've got to coordinate imaging and other things. And communication is key, because keeping everybody on board will help you get through what you need to do, but also keep it as smooth as possible for your participant. And on the day of the visit, always think GCP. I know this is drummed into us all from the very start, but it really should be the backbone of everything that you're thinking about and everything that you're doing. As I've said before, give yourself plenty of time. Make sure you've got your PI or whoever's phone numbers written down. You've got ways to contact people if there are issues. Have a copy of your protocol available to hand for reference, just because you might think that you're organised, but actually, just as a check, sometimes it's best to have that there with you. For consent visits, think about your paperwork, think about your trail of what needs to happen, and make sure you've got a minimum of 2 copies of both the information sheet and the consent forms, because as we all know, we need to have a copy for the participant themselves, and if there's a study partner, there will be consent forms for them too. And then we have to have a copy for our medical records and to go into our site file. And every location will do it differently. In Glasgow, we would electronically upload a copy of the consent form, but you would follow whatever your local practice in that area was. And again, if it's a dosing visit, it is your responsibility as the person that's going to be giving the dose, or if you are the coordinator, to make sure that you're checking with the nurses and clinical staff to make sure that the anaphylaxis kit has been checked in case there are any untoward events. That the staff know where the resuscitation trolley is, they know which team to ask for when calling for help, because research facilities are often in side buildings or they're in different areas within the hospital, and you need to know exactly what resuscitation team you're phoning for. And also thinking about who else will be on the floor, what is their level of training in emergency scenarios, and what support might you need to ensure that you are as safe as possible to proceed at that time. During the visit, these visits can be long, they can be really stressful, and they can be quite upsetting for people if there's delays or they're not going as they've planned. So make sure that you've thought about any breaks that are needed and also any refreshments that you might need to order for your participant and their study partner. Generally, we can have tea and coffee and biscuits available, but for a longer visit, that might not quite cut it. Before they leave, I would urge everybody to just do a quick run through of your worksheets and of your data collection and your samples. Make sure you have collected everything that needs collected and in the right order. Make sure that you've got all of your data collected, because as Sarah has mentioned before, it is much easier to do it properly the first time than it is to try and go back and explain why something wasn't done to an auditor, or in an inspection, try and recreate that pattern. So make sure that you've got everything that you need, and that also that your participant and their study partner are really clear on what their next visit is and what the expectations of that visit will be. So are they going to expect a scan date to be sent to them? Are they going to expect to have to go for blood tests before they see you? What's going to happen, and will transport be booked for them? And particularly on a first visit, to go over with participants their travel expenses. It sounds really small, but actually I've had patients who've been unable to take part in a study because they've not had £1 to get on a bus. And that should never be a barrier to someone accessing the care and support that they need. So reimbursement of travel expenses and making sure that's as clear and easy as possible is really important. Also document absolutely everything. There are GCP principles around making sure that everything's attributable and legible. And we know that many of our medical colleagues and nurses, I'm a nurse, my handwriting's not great, but we need to make sure that it's all very clearly documented and we can see who documented it, where, when, and ensure that that is accurate. And then really taken after the visit, you want to enter your data into your electronic case report file as soon as you can. Contractually, we've usually got 5 days to do that, but in a non-commercial study, we might have a bit longer. But the quicker you can put the data in when it's fresh in your mind, the better. It also helps for any safety issues, so that if the data is going in and that the sponsor is noticing safety patterns, no matter how small you think they are, they might want to act. So it's really important to get your data in and make sure it's accurate. And then just liaising with your PI to make sure that everything's sorted for your next visit. And although that sounds like an absolute ton of work, and it's very rewarding work. And what we need to remember as researchers is that we will be able to impact and improve the lives of people that we will never meet clinically through our own practice. But by conducting these research visits and by contributing towards the science and the development of new treatments, millions of people worldwide will benefit. And I've seen through my cancer clinical trials career to date, CAR T-cell therapy coming now as standard of care. I've had patients who were coming to the hospice and then were referred to us as a phase 1 clinical trial as a last hope, who are now 5 years cancer-free and living their lives in a way that they never thought would be capable before. So research really is hope. And right now it's estimated that there are just under 1 million people living with dementia in the UK today. About a third of those people don't have a diagnosis, and that means that they can't access the help and support or research that they need and deserve. And research conducted within the Alzheimer Society has indicated that only 1 in 10 people that live with dementia have been spoken to about research at all, and that is in all forms, whether that's a questionnaire study, a quality of life, or right through to clinical drug trials. And actually, if we think about the number of clinical trials which are available, a recent response from the Prime Minister's questions indicated that in 2023 into 2024, there was only 26 clinical trials available within the NHS. Now, I know in the private sector there may have been some additional ones, but there won't have been that many. And if I reflect on previous experience, we would run more trials than that just for blood cancer in a small transplant centre in the middle of Glasgow. So it's a stark injustice. And actually only 328 people took part in those 26 trials. So when we work that out, it's less than 0.03% of the population that could have potentially benefited. Again, when we're looking at compared to the NIHR recruitment overall, it remains at 0.03. And we know that without driving forward progress in clinical trials, we're not going to be able to drive forward advances in treatment. And I would actively encourage any of you to get in touch or to consider a career in clinical research, because it is very rewarding and enjoyable. And that's all I've got. Thanks.
Hello, sorry about before. Parcel came and I ran downstairs. I thought I've got time to get the parcel, and then when I came back, you'd moved on. But well done for managing without me, and thank you so much. They were both really great talks and complemented each other, I think, so well from getting into the detail. I've got a question for both of you to start with. So I've recently been involved with some NIHR work aimed at undergrads to try and explain that there are lots of ways that you can be involved in research that doesn't necessarily mean being a researcher yourself. And I think clinical trials delivery, and you both touched on this, really exemplifies where that is very relevant. So you both touched on this, as I mentioned. What are some of those roles in clinical trials? So if you work in the NHS right now, or you're a young person who's about to start a job, list out some of these people and some of these jobs that are involved in trial delivery, because it's not just research nurses and doctors, right? Sarah, you go first. And then we can test. Laura can pick up on the ones you miss.
Yeah, so thinking through our team, so we have the medics who take on the principal investigator or sub-investigator roles, research nurses, we have a clinical trial pharmacist, we will also have pharmacy technicians to support, psychometrists or raters, who are often people who have a psychology degree, who will do the memory and thinking tests, dedicated recruitment teams as well, which is a really nice entry point as how I entered research. And that's kind of our entry level jobs as well. Quality managers, IT, yeah, that's probably the main ones that come to my mind.
So
yeah,
doctors, and I guess when we're talking specifically about Alzheimer's and dementia trials, that tends to be psychiatrists and neurologists, I'm guessing, primarily. So psychologists, neurologists, and then you mentioned research nurses and psychologists.
And other medics that I've worked with, so GPs, make brilliant research doctors as well, particularly because dementia very rarely exists on its own. People have lots of different medical conditions. So actually having GPs who have really broad knowledge can be really helpful in a team when you're getting blood results back and ECGs and things like that. And then because lumbar punctures are increasingly common, I've worked quite a lot in the past with anaesthetists, because typically we find neurologists and anaesthetists are really highly skilled at that procedure, and are the most likely to be able to come in and support to do that. So those would be the kind of specialities I've typically worked with.
I was trying to think as well, is there a new job? Is there a specific job that's called trial delivery? I can't remember. I'm sure I remember seeing them on NHS website when this is obviously, we're talking quite particularly, I should add that this is quite particular to the UK as well, although I would imagine that trial delivery in the US, whilst, or you know, sub-Saharan Africa or Asia or wherever in the world you happen to be, ultimately the protocols tend to be the same. It's the same kind of people involved. It just might be organized a little bit differently. Well, what was the point of my question? Yeah, a clinical trial delivery professional or something like that. I think there's a specific job, isn't there? Laura's Googling it. No, she's not.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to turn. It says I'm still sharing my screen, and I thought I turned it off. Sorry, that's what I was trying to do. Do you mean a clinical
trial practitioner? That's it. Click on the clinical trial practitioner, and I mean, and then what? Statisticians as well, and monitors, trial. I know we've advertised a few jobs recently, which are trial managers. So I guess they lend themselves to people who've got a background in project management, because it's kind of a big project management job at trial delivery manager, I guess. You've managed trial delivery, Sarah, and well, you as well, Laura. How do you find that role? Is that a little bit more away from the patients and participants?
So
what are the skills you need, I guess, for that position?
Yeah, so there definitely are project management skills and program management skills required, and you have to be competent with administrative procedures and kind of IT systems. For me, I've always been a research nurse and clinical trial coordinator combined. So although the actual data part of it is away from the patients, I've always then been able to see patients within the trials that I'm working on. So you feel as if you really are the pin that is holding that everybody that's working on that trial together, because you're seeing it end to end from the point of expression of interest coming through right the way through to study closeout and everything that comes in between. So, you know, in addition, I suppose there are increasingly now mathematicians, statisticians, biostatisticians, computational scientists. There's all sorts of new roles that are coming into clinical trials in terms of other healthcare, other disease areas, but I'm sure they'll be coming to dementia soon. So I think that clinical research is something that you can touch upon in many ways. You don't have to be a researcher yourself to contribute. I've worked with some amazing radiologists, radiographers, geriatricians, who research is not a core part of their care, but they do help us with some procedures or some things that we need for that study. And therefore they're helping contribute towards the solution as much as anyone else.
I suppose we've come across quite a lot of people who finish a PhD and at the end of that are kind of maybe in fundamental science, or and then think, oh, what am I going to do next? I've decided I don't want to carry on into academia. I think maybe opportunities to work in clinical research might be a little bit overlooked, because I think even just putting that word clinical before it makes this assumption that you've got to be some kind of healthcare professional to work in that space and that those jobs aren't for you. But I think if you've done a PhD in academia, in fundamental science in some way, and now you're looking for something else to try or something else to do, don't overlook the opportunity. I mean, clinical trial delivery isn't a job we often hear about during clinical training or during PhDs. How do you think we can better promote it as a career option from undergrad onwards, really? What more could we do?
I think introducing it as a concept, in addition to, you obviously have your research methods training and your kind of core theoretical training, but actually covering it as an area that has a much more clinical focus and much more patient-facing focus right from the start. There's been some really excellent examples in nurse training of initiatives where we've went in and worked with second and third year students to raise awareness of clinical research and clinical research nursing as a career. The UK Clinical Research Facility now facilitates student placements. So we have students coming to us for 6-8 weeks at a time to really see what being a research nurse would be like. So I think it's about making it more accessible and attractive and highlighting opportunities that are available for people to come and spend some time with us.
I love that you said placements, because that was exactly what I was thinking. It's just opening up the opportunities to people as well, and that could be anything from just a week's internship to understand the variety of careers, through to we've had people with us for kind of a full year out of their university training to work in a research environment. But I think getting people to see the reality and the breadth of roles there are, and you get to have patient contact, but it's not in a clinical setting, because that's not for everyone. That's what I worked out quite quickly, that clinical work after a psychology degree probably wasn't for me. Research was the right place to be. Yeah, just finding more and more opportunities for clinical trials centres to open up their doors to short placements for people to get a feel of what it's like to work in drug trial delivery.
I guess, I mean, I've always thought, it's always surprised me, I think, a little bit that it was, because the NIHR, for as long as I remember, in the UK, that's the National Institute for Health and Care Research, for as long as I can remember, has had initiatives to encourage more jobbing from facing back to clinical people again, but clinical facing staff to get involved, you know, to take up these opportunities. But I could never really understand why it was a struggle, because it seems like such a varied job. I mean, it's kind of exciting, right? You might be working on multiple trials, you might involve home visits, it can involve going to different places. I mean, is it as good as I think it is? I mean, is it an interesting role?
I mean, I love it. I think it's been a career that has opened many doors for me and had many different iterations. I've worked in lots of different jobs and functions, different disease areas. It's a job that is never boring, because there's always new advances and always something new to learn. And also you're able to offer participants a potential a potential option that might help improve their quality of life, or help it, in some cases and in some disease areas, it might cure them. And that's something that wasn't otherwise available. So it is a hugely rewarding job. But I think the challenge in recruitment of research staff sits around that a lot of people still don't understand what the job is. They think that it's, sitting in a white ivory tower with some lab equipment around you and never seeing a patient. They don't necessarily understand that there is patient contact and lots of it, or that a clinical research nurse is really akin to being a nurse specialist and will take a patient through a journey and support them in their aspects thereafter. And also, a research nurse is a core hours job, so Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. And on the ward, I know that pay is a challenge within the NHS, but ward nurses get paid out of hours and they get paid supplements. And some nurses who would be fantastic in research simply can't afford to lose their antisocial hours. And therefore, that's what stops them. So they might be my biggest advocate on the ward. They might be the best person at recording adverse events and get really involved and want to be a research champion. But for whatever their personal circumstances, they can't work Monday to Friday, and they can drop their...
Are there opportunities to kind of double up on your role? I don't mean take on extra role, but I mean, I guess if anybody's watching this I'm glad you said it, because I would have found it awkward to mention that it is kind of boiling back down to money, is to go to the R&D office at your hospital and see what opportunities are available, even if it's to do, split and do a shift in research or get involved, or, there are commercial trial sites around as well, which I guess, Sarah, you have some experience of.
Yeah, we have a lot of staff who have joint roles because they wanted to keep kind of their toes in with the NHS or with an academic institute, me being an example of that, but also wanted to kind of have an industry role as well. So that's been really easy for us to set up, and I think it definitely helps us to have staff with really broad experiences. When I've worked in kind of purely NHS settings, I've worked with lots of medics who have that sort of setup where they get 1 or 2 sessions a week, and that's their kind of time to work on clinical trials, but then also hold a caseload as well, and that seems really nice. So I think it's finding kind of opportunities to do that for other allied health professionals and nurses, and build kind of more flexible career pathways, because I think having kind of blended working actually just helps everyone to be able to, it's going to improve the team, and it's going to make kind of maybe your clinical work have a different impact on it because you're embedded in the research world as well. I think finding those ways forward would be really helpful for research generally.
Yeah, and the NIH. Oh, sorry, Adam.
No, go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say, I completely agree with what you've said, Sarah, and the NIHR actually have a number of funding options available for nurses and allied health professionals and others to access PhD opportunities, or to access, you know, these kind of more bespoke split roles. So if it's something that anybody on this call is thinking about, they should look at the NIHR website and see whether there are any calls that are available to them.
Definitely, and particularly, I mean, obviously, if you're in the UK, and that extends to social care now as well. I mean, many of the NIHR issues recently have provided internship opportunities to people working in local authorities, for example, and social workers and others working, obviously not particularly on drug trial or pharma trial delivery, but in that clinical research, because we know as well that care, studies to understand how we can best care for people and deal with end of life or everything else that happens in this space is important too. What do you have a sense of what particular skill set is useful? What kind of people do you think might find this an attractive job? I mean, do you need to be really inquisitive? I mean, because I think it's those, I mean, those that think, oh, I really like patient care, I think might go, oh, well, I don't want to be involved in trials. But actually, as you've said, you have lots of face-to-face interaction. And if anything, you're offering a hope. But I'm very conscious that it's different when you're preparing somebody for a trial and you're trying to work out if they're the right participant or how well you think they'll cope with this drug that they've got to take. Is there a particular kind of set of skills that you think are useful or valuable to have?
I think that you have to be someone who has a drive to always want to improve things and always want to learn and advance your practice and advance knowledge. So yeah, being inquisitive. I think a keen attention to detail is really required if you're someone who's going to be driven mad by filling.
Is there a lot of paperwork?
Yeah.
Even more than than your average NHS?
Oh, 10 times more. I don't know.
We've just put everybody off. They're now going and looking for a job in the industry.
You know, I just think that if you're someone who would find it challenging, that would be difficult, but it is balanced by lots of other options. I'll let Sarah come in since I've put people off my paperwork comment.
I think each role will have kind of a different blend of characteristics. It's being able to hold a few things at once, I think, but when you're with the participant, it's being very rigid about sticking to that protocol, but then also having the personal skills to make that an enjoyable experience for the participant, because yes, they may benefit from the drug, but ultimately we have no idea. And so they're giving up their time, their samples. We want to make it as easy a process to do as possible. So you're balancing, how do I stick as rigidly as possible to this whilst also being a human and not being a robot? And so you're holding quite different skill sets in one person quite a lot of the time. And that I think
some people like filling in forms as well, right? I mean, you know,
I love a form.
Autism diagnosis is on the rise. Some people really like filling in forms, making sure that they're completed, filed, organized. and everybody's in the right place and everything's in the right place. If you're one of those people, it sounds like clinical trials would be the perfect job for you.
And that's built into your work plan as well. So because everyone knows how much paperwork there is in clinical trials, it's not the same as, right, you've got 20 patients to get through and then the paperwork has to be done at some point. So skip your lunch break and stay on an hour extra. That's all built into, this is the patient flow. You're going to see them here, and then you need to do the ECRF data entry. So if you've got
very
well-run trials, it's operationalized.
I can speak to that. As a trial participant, you just know that on the day you arrived, it's all about you, it's organized around you, and there's this sequence of events that's going to happen because it's all laid out. It's not so spontaneous, I guess, which I guess some people, as much as it's varied in the job, because you might be working on multiple trials at once, I guess, yeah, it lends itself to those kind of people. I have some stats. Are you interested in some stats that I'm going to get these in? We've only got 7 minutes left, so do get your questions in if you've got any questions for anybody who's thinking about this. And I want to know more about the work that Alzheimer's Society is doing in this space as well. So we might overrun by a minute just so I can put Laura on the spot. But did you know the average clinical trial takes 7 to 10 years from design to outcome? So the trials you're working on now, I guess, which rings true. I remember supporting work on the aducanumab study probably 7 years ago, and aducanumab got licensed a couple of years ago. So that was fast, tracked, although not used now in the same way. Up to 80% of trial delays are due to problems with recruitment and delivery, not the science. I guess that might be surprising to some people and absolutely not to others. Trial delivery staff obviously are juggling regulatory paperwork, recruitment, training, data compliance, all under strict timelines. And the NIHR Clinical Research Network employs over 30,000 staff involved in trial delivery across the UK. So you could become one of those people. That's enough stats. Laura, tell us. So the Alzheimer's Society, what's going on? So obviously Alzheimer's Society has a vested interest in ensuring that trials are delivered, because it's your members, the people you support, that will benefit from that. So what is Alzheimer's Society doing that's new in that space to kind of help fast track some of this work?
Yeah, the Alzheimer's Society are investing £3 million over the next 3 years to create the first UK-wide, in terms of all 4 nations of the UK, dedicated dementia research nurse network. And this will embed ring-fenced staff with the ambition to increase research opportunities, improve capacity and capability within the NHS, work with colleagues to broaden diversity among those recruited into clinical trials, because we know when we look at the data of the published dementia work, and actually all disease specialties to date, that there's a shocking lack of diversity in clinical trial recruitment. And in order for us to get treatments that benefit everybody, we have to make sure that we are supporting everybody to access these opportunities. And we're working with the UK Dementia Trials Network. So for anyone that's not heard about the UK DTN, it's an investment by the government of just under £50 million over 5 years to establish approximately 20 dedicated early phase dementia clinical research centres within the NHS and across all 4 nations of the UK. And the Alzheimer's Society have partnered with the UK DTN and embedded our nurse network there. We will, through this, there are a number of work streams around working with industry to understand what the drug pipeline is, so that we can ensure that our sites and our staff have the appropriate resource, training, capacity and capability needed to deliver the new treatments that are coming through. We want to make sure that we are supporting education and training and workforce development, and there's a piece of work being led by Professor John Paul Taylor in the University of Edinburgh, specifically around that for the UK Dementia Trials Network. And there's some fellowships applications that are out just now, I believe, for medical staff, and we hope that nursing and allied health similar projects will, initiatives rather, will come out for them in the coming years. And also looking at we just ran a baseline survey of people living with dementia or mild cognitive impairment and those that support them to understand perceptions of dementia research, experiences of being approached or not, when people might want to hear about it, how they would like to hear about it, and for those that have taken part in research, what was their experience and how could we improve that? We had over 1,200 responses and to that survey. An analysis is ongoing just now and we're hoping to be able to share results come the summer. And we're going to use this to work with the Dementia Trials Network to develop bespoke support services that will really help empower people and educate them about what clinical trials are, what it might mean for them, how to access research opportunities, support people through screening processes, because we know that can be a really stressful time for people when there are uncertainties around whether or not they can go in the study, support them through the study. And then again, at the end, it can be very difficult for people who felt that they're in a cocoon of support from a trial team to then leave the study and transition back to standard of care. So we're
and that must be taking learning from your cancer, because of course that's where things like Macmillan nurses and cancer have been so great at providing that ongoing holistic support during trial participation. That isn't to say we haven't been doing a good job of that in dementia in the past, but I think particularly with early phase trials that you mentioned there, they are slightly higher risk, I guess, than phase 3 trials. That isn't to say that there is a risk, because of course, but no trials are without risk, are they? So this is embedding Alzheimer's Society nurses alongside these 20 trial centres to really support that recruitment, that training, that public awareness. This isn't actually doing the trial delivery, right? This is providing the support around it.
No, it includes the trial delivery. The nurses will be seeing patients and recruiting patients into studies and supporting them through the studies, including administering medications or whatever that study protocol needs. So the nurses will be that key contact within their local areas to bring together existing dementia research infrastructure and clinical services, working with Alzheimer's Society colleagues and support in terms of our dementia support and partnerships to improve referral pathways in from the community and identify where we might have pockets of suitable participants that might want to take part. And we're also doing a piece of work to look at participation and how we can support research participation overall into all types of dementia research, and working closely with our colleagues and services, because some of the feedback that we're getting is that people would like to be approached in their own homes after diagnosis when they've had a chance to digest that information and let it settle. So we want to make sure that, much in the same way that the Scottish Neurodegeneration and Dementia Research Network has done their Confident Conversations piece of work around enabling their dementia advisors to have these conversations and then signpost onwards, we're looking to do a similar piece of work for England, Wales and Northern Ireland to ensure that everybody's got the same information and access that they need.
Oh, that's so exciting. We'd love to have you back to talk about, I'm sure we could do an entire live stream, just a salon session just on that work. So do keep us updated. And if there are any opportunities that arise to get involved in that, do let us know and we'll make sure that they're listed and added to the Dementia Researcher website. So if you're watching this and you want to get involved in that work in some way, do let us know, or drop a line to Laura, who's a community member, who I'm sure will happily chat to you. I'm afraid this is all we've got time for, but as ever, I usually finish these off by training. We've got an instance of popular AI model that's been trained just on content from our website, not from the internet. And it's been trained, and I've asked it, what were the 10 top tips for careers in drug trial delivery? And this are the 10 top tips. And let's see if we test you now to see if you mentioned these things and if our website is any good or not. So here we go. Number 1 was understand the whole ecosystem. Trials involve clinical research, regulatory authorities, logistical, human elements, ethics. familiarize yourself with the entire process. I don't think you both touched on that. Well done. Sarah, particularly on the ethics. Ethics panels are also always recruiting. Attention to detail is your superpower. Small errors can delay entire studies. You both touched on that as well. Communication is key with participants, teams, and stakeholders as well. So if that's a skill that you recognize in yourself, this could be the job for you. Flexibility is essential. No 2 days or trials are the same. Number 5, keep learning. Regulation, protocols, tools change all the time. So it's a great opportunity for anybody who enjoys ongoing training and learning new techniques. Advocate for yourself. Career paths can be unclear. So I think it's one of those things. You're not going to find these jobs instantly necessarily advertised on LinkedIn, or if they are, they're looking for people who might not be at your level of experience. So if you're wanting to find a first footstep into this, go to the NIHR website, go talk to the R&D department at your hospital if you're in the UK. Reach out to people like Laura and Sarah, who might be able to be listed in our mentoring program to give advice to those new in that space, and go ask people who are working in trial delivery. Be patient and persistent. Trials move slowly, so don't expect instant results. Protect participants. Trust, ethics, and empathy are a core role. Join a community. Find networks both in and outside your own institution. And finally, number 10, celebrate the wins. Trial delivery is often invisible but vital. So when you do hit your recruitment targets, get a participant who comes back and says that they're benefiting, or finally see that drug you've been working on released into the wild, you've got to celebrate those wins. Laura, Sarah, you've both been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We'll be back in the Dementia Researcher Salon next week, when we will be talking about, can you tell I'm looking this up now because I can't remember. Join us back in the salon next Wednesday, back at noon again, where we're going to be talking about developing and presenting conference posters, a really important topic because many of you will have just got told your AIC abstracts were accepted. The AIC is also doing some webinars in the next few weeks on presenting posters. So if you're making a poster for the AIC or any other conference, join us at noon next Wednesday, because we have the incredible Sarah Naomi James, who you've seen from before, and Sophia Marcolini, who from Alzheimer Centorium Groningen in the Netherlands, who are going to come and talk about their work on posters. Thank you so much again, Sarah and Laura. And if you want any more information on this topic, do check out the Dementia Researcher website. We just published a blog yesterday from a brilliant Scottish retired old age psychiatrist, Peter Connolly, talking about what the role that memory clinics play in trial delivery as well. So do check out our blogs on the website. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.